The man of many faces, the most feared prisoner in California. This is a story about a life filled with darkness, pain, and unimaginable choices. Today, we're diving into the shocking and haunting journey of Jamie Osuna, a man whose actions and life story have left people horrified and speechless. Through childhood trauma, troubled relationships, and violent crimes, his path is one that few can comprehend, but many can't look away from. If you enjoy deep dives into real and raw stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps bring more detailed stories to light. Stay with us as we unfold a tale that's as unsettling as it is unforgettable. The infamous comic book villain, the Joker, once declared, "The only way to survive in this world is to live without rules." This chilling philosophy was taken to heart by a young man who turned it into a sinister blueprint for life. Living without rules can pose a grave danger to society, as demonstrated by Jamie Osuna. During his trial, Osuna smirked and casually waved at the grieving family of the woman he brutally murdered, as the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment for the gruesome torture and murder of a 36-year-old mother. Osuna, clad in his prison uniform and marked with distinctive face tattoos, displayed no remorse. He nonchalantly gave the judge a thumbs up as if to approve the life sentence being handed down. Osuna's crimes were so macabre that they seemed barely human. He became one of the most infamous serial killers, relishing in the torture and murder of his victims, finding a perverse joy in their suffering. Dubbed the real-life Joker and the Man with 1,000 Faces, his numerous tattoos, including a Joker smile and a pentagram on his forehead, contributed to his notorious persona. Some speculated that his heinous behavior as an adult was shaped by a troubled childhood. Born in Bakersfield, California on March 7, 1988, Jamie Osuna's early life was marred by violence. His mother, Michelle, was just 19 and his father 21 when he was born. The relationship between his parents was fraught with aggression. His father was particularly abusive. In a horrifying act of violence, his father kicked Michelle in the stomach when she was 9 months pregnant, leaving a lasting impact on Jamie, who was born with a scar under his eye from the assault. Despite the violence, Michelle forgave the father of her child, and the tumultuous relationship continued. However, when Jamie was just 1 year old, his father abandoned the family, leaving Michelle to fend for herself and her 2 young children with scant resources. Michelle didn't remain alone for long after her separation. She soon met a man named Jeff, married him, and moved into his house with her 2 children. Jeff also had a son from a previous relationship. It was clear that Jeff needed Michelle but was less accepting of her children, showing a distinct coldness towards the 2 boys he was now responsible for. Jeff particularly disliked Jamie, the younger of Michelle's 2 sons. Once, after a family fishing trip, a tired and fussy Jamie began to cry. Jeff tolerated his crying for a short time, but eventually lost his temper. In a shocking act, he opened the car door and pushed Jamie, who was still buckled into his car seat, out of the moving vehicle. Michelle was terrified, especially as she saw a truck closely following their car. Miraculously, the car seat landed upright and off the traffic lane. Jeff stopped the car long enough for Michelle to retrieve Jamie from the road, but he adamantly refused to take the boy to the hospital, claiming he saw no visible injuries. As Jamie grew older, it was discovered that he had sustained minor brain damage from the incident, likely affecting his development. In another instance of cruelty, Jeff tied Jamie to a tree outside their home and whipped him with a rope for some minor wrongdoing. This time, Michelle intervened and called the police, unable to tolerate Jeff's abusive actions any longer. Although Jeff tried to dismiss his actions as a playful joke when the police arrived, the evidence of abuse was clear from the marks on Jamie's body. Jeff was arrested and charged with child abuse. However, he returned home a few days later, and the cycle of violence sadly continued. Friends, did you know that over 90% of people watch videos without subscribing to the channel? If you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so to support me. Now, let's continue with our story. Michelle and Jeff had 2 children of their own, whom Jeff treated with care and affection, a stark contrast to his behavior towards his 2 stepsons. Jeff's resentment towards the boys seemed to grow each day. In one outburst, he threw a fork at Michelle's older son. Thankfully, the fork didn't cause much harm, but the incident shocked the boy's grandparents. They decided to take him in, offering him a safe haven, but they did not extend this offer to Jamie, who they strangely also disliked. This rejection meant Jamie was left to face his stepfather's anger and abuse alone. Michelle often described Jamie as a very loving an affectionate child, yet he faced inexplicable disdain from others. Whenever Jamie tried to hug his mother, it would enrage Jeff. In cruel acts of punishment, Jeff would deny Jamie food or force him to eat from a plate placed on the floor, much like a dog. Although Michelle was deeply upset by this treatment, she felt powerless to intervene, fearing her husband's wrath as she, too, was a victim of his abuse. Jeff frequently threatened her, saying that if she ever tried to leave, she would suffer the consequences. One day, the situation became unbearable for Michelle. She gathered some belongings, took the children, and fled the house. By the time Jamie went to live with his grandparents, the damage from his tumultuous childhood was evident. Michelle noticed a significant change in her son. The once sweet and affectionate boy had become emotionless and detached, withdrawing into himself. A few years later, Jamie's stepfather Jeff passed away from a heart attack, but by then, Jamie's behavior had already taken a troubling turn. During his teenage years, Jamie became increasingly troublesome. He joined a local street gang and started engaging in criminal activities. His record soon filled with charges including petty theft, drug possession and use, hooliganism, and involvement in numerous fights. His criminal activities escalated in severity and danger as he grew older. Jamie began using illegal drugs at the age of 15. One day at school, a dispute with another student escalated and Jamie stabbed him during the altercation. This incident landed him in a juvenile detention center for 4 years. Less than a year after his release, while still on probation, Jamie found trouble again. This time, he attended a house party organized by a mother named Jane, who wanted to keep her 16-year-old son safe by hosting a supervised party at home. Jane, a former prison nurse and psychotherapist who had left her job after a brutal attack by an inmate, spared no expense for the party, providing drinks and snacks and even joining in the festivities. However, things took a turn when she drank a little too much and started dancing with one of the teenagers. Jane's behavior didn't sit well with her nephew, who urged Jamie, who was nearby, to intervene. Jamie, needing little persuasion, went to the kitchen, retrieved a knife, and stabbed the teenager Jane had been dancing with. Although the injury wasn't serious, the incident violated Jamie's probation and led to another arrest. It turned out Jamie had his own reasons for intervening at the house party. He had developed a quick attraction to Jane. After the incident, Jamie was sent back to prison, but he and Jane kept in close touch. They wrote letters to each other almost every day and frequently talked on the phone. Despite their 17-year age difference, they considered themselves good friends. Jane found Jamie to be a highly intelligent man, and she enjoyed their conversations about philosophy and psychology. She thought of him as a gentleman and was charmed by his discussions and masculine beauty. This connection grew as they continued to communicate during Jamie's incarceration. As Jamie's release date neared, Jane was eager to meet him. Over the years, Jamie had acquired several new tattoos. By the time Jamie was released on parole, Jane had already given birth to their son. Despite his past actions, Jamie convinced Jane to let him prove he could be a good father and partner. He expressed a desire to break the cycle of abuse he had grown up with and provide a better life for his son. Jamie promised Jane that he had changed and that their future would be different. However, old habits die hard, and Jamie soon fell back into destructive patterns. He resumed using illegal substances, which only exacerbated his violent and aggressive behavior towards Jane. Despite his promises, the negative aspects of Jamie's character seemed only to intensify, proving that significant change was perhaps beyond his reach. To cope with Jamie's erratic behavior, Jane learned to disengage and ignore him, hoping to avoid provoking further aggression. This tactic worked to some extent, but there were times when she had to confront him to protect herself and their child. One evening, Jamie's behavior escalated dangerously. In a fit of rage, he smashed a photo frame, grabbed a shard of glass, and cut his own arm deeply, hitting a vein. Jane was terrified, fearing for his life as well as her own safety. Despite the severity of his injury, Jamie refused any medical help. He crudely bandaged the wound himself with tape and covered it with a black sock, adamant about not going to the hospital. In another disturbing episode, Jamie expressed his discontent loudly, but Jane chose to focus on her responsibilities as a mother, trying to shield their son from the chaos. In a desperate bid to gain Jane's attention, Jamie took a drastic and disturbing action. He approached the bed where Jane's 7-year-old son from a previous relationship was sleeping. With a menacing look directed at Jane, he pushed the boy onto the hard parquet floor. Unlike Jamie's mother, who had often failed to protect her children from harm, Jane was not about to let her children suffer. Fueled by a fierce protective instinct, she rushed to the kitchen, grabbed 2 knives, and hurled them at her husband, startling him with her bold defiance. Jamie was taken aback by Jane's reaction, and in his shock, he left the house and soon committed another act that violated his parole terms. This led to him being incarcerated once more. Jamie was released again on Halloween in 2011, and by then, his face was completely covered with Joker-like tattoos. While others removed their Halloween masks at the end of the festivities, Jamie's inked visage remained, a permanent reminder of his chosen identity, one that he could. Iet Pina's childhood was marked by significant challenges, not unlike those faced by Jamie Osuna. Born to a mother who was just 15 years old, Iet quickly found herself shouldering adult responsibilities. As she grew, her roles included managing the household and caring for her younger sister Danielle, who was born with a congenital illness. Their mother was often absent, usually spending time with her boyfriend and only returning home late in the evenings. This neglect led to a dangerous environment where both girls suffered mistreatment at the hands of their mother's boyfriend. Despite Iet's pleas for help, their mother dismissed her claims, accusing her of seeking attention. The toll of these early hardships was profound, and Iet turned to alcohol to dull her pain. By the age of 16, she had given birth to her first child and would go on to have several more. However, her life began to spiral downwards in 2004 when she started using psychostimulants. Her addiction worsened, resulting in her losing custody of her children, a loss that devastated her. In 2011, Iet's struggles compounded when she was arrested for possessing illegal substances and gave birth to her 6th child while incarcerated. The baby was immediately taken from her, adding another layer of trauma to her already turbulent life. Once released, thanks to her sister Danielle, who posted bail, Iet was determined to reclaim custody of her newborn. She made daily visits to the hospital to see him, managing to maintain sobriety for several months. However, Iet's fragile recovery was shattered when she was informed that her child was going to be adopted. This news was a severe blow, and unable to cope, she relapsed into drug use. Financially destitute, Iet found herself spending most of her time at the El Morocco Motel, a temporary escape from her relentless difficulties. Tragically, on November 13, 2011, Danielle received heart-wrenching news. Iet had been found deceased in her motel room. The extent of her injuries and the delay in discovering her body led to a decision to cremate her remains. This was a deeply painful choice for the family, made in the face of an unbearable reality that highlighted the tragic end of Iet's troubled life. Experts estimated that Iet had been deceased for about 5 days before her body was discovered. The coroner concluded that she died from blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. The prosecutor, Jane, was interviewed again by the police, during which she recounted the unsettling phone call from Jamie, her estranged husband. Following this, Jamie was arrested at his grandparents' house and brought in for questioning. In his defense, Jamie denied all allegations. He claimed that his mention of having hurt someone was only meant to frighten Jane, not a confession to any crime. Then, he began to attack Jane's credibility in an attempt to deflect from himself. Jamie questioned why an adult woman like Jane would marry someone like him, suggesting that she was mentally unstable and accusing her of trying to frame him. During this lengthy discussion with the officers, Jamie kept focusing on discrediting Jane. The officers noted Jamie's ramblings but were struck by another chilling detail. Iet Pina bore a striking resemblance to Jane. This similarity raised a harrowing possibility. Could Jamie have targeted Iet as a surrogate for his animosity towards Jane? When the police suggested this motive to Jamie, he abruptly stopped cooperating and refused to engage further with the investigators. He was then taken to county jail, but his obsessive behavior towards Jane did not cease. Even from behind bars, Jamie continued to harass Jane. He made several calls to Child Protective Services, falsely accusing her of being an unfit mother in hopes of having her children removed from her care. When Jane blocked his phone number, Jamie resorted to contacting her through mutual acquaintances. In one extreme act, Jamie sent Jane a package containing a dead rat, underscoring his menacing message that she was not safe even with him in prison. He even attempted to orchestrate violence against her from inside the jail, as evidenced by a letter intercepted by prison officials. This letter was addressed to another inmate and included Jane's home address along with instructions on how to harm her. At one point, Jane found herself on the wrong side of the law after her son claimed she had hit him. It was unclear if this accusation was true or if Jamie had manipulated his son into lying. While being transported to court on a prison bus, Jane was assaulted by another inmate. It was later revealed that Jamie had orchestrated this attack, promising a Latin American woman illegal substances in return for harming his wife. Fortunately, the guards intervened quickly enough to prevent any serious injuries. Although Jane faced serious accusations, the charges were eventually dropped and she regained custody of her youngest child, who was Jamie's son. Despite this small victory, the ordeal took a toll on her other children, who were placed with their biological fathers. Thus, Jamie succeeded in causing... During the interview, Jamie chillingly admitted to his crimes, including the brutal end he brought to Iet Pina. He described his actions with a disturbing sense of enjoyment and a chilling lack of regret. He revealed to the journalist that if released, he would not hesitate to kill again, comparing the act of taking a life to an addictive high more compelling to him than any other experience, even more desirable than spending time with the most beautiful woman in the world. Jamie also disclosed that Iet was not his first victim. He claimed responsibility for other lives taken, stating that he had meticulously cleaned those crime scenes to avoid detection. In a horrifying twist, he admitted that in Ivet's case, he had intentionally left evidence like his fingerprints and DNA to ensure he would be linked to the crime as part of a dark and twisted plan. His rationale for wanting to be caught was rooted in a perverse desire to disconnect himself completely from society. Jamie expressed no concerns about spending his life in prison. His only fear was facing the death penalty. To avoid the death sentence, he planned to leverage confessions to the additional crimes during his trial, hoping it would be enough to spare him from capital punishment. The reporter attempted to delve deeper into the details of the other crimes Jamie mentioned, but he provided only scant information. He briefly described one victim as a 27-year-old man whom he had killed during his teenage years and the other as a 32-year-old woman he met when he was 18. When pressed about any feelings of remorse, Jamie responded with a cold laugh, stating unequivocally that he regretted nothing, cementing his image as a remorseless individual. Jamie Osuna did not view himself as a monster. In his own mind, he was simply someone who refused to conform to societal norms, indulging his darkest desires without fear or guilt. He believed he had created his identity intentionally, fully aware of the consequences that awaited him. Yet, he felt no remorse. During his interview with the journalist, Jamie stated that his decision to plead guilty was not out of consideration for Iet Pina's family, sparing them a long trial or the trauma of seeing disturbing evidence. Instead, his motive was purely self-serving. He preferred the certainty of life in prison to the prolonged wait for a trial. The journalist who interviewed Jamie was deeply shaken by the experience. She spent weeks trying to process the horrors he described, unsure of how to proceed. She debated whether to share the information with the prosecution or let the trial play out naturally. Ultimately, she decided to wait and see how events unfolded, hoping the justice system would take its course. When the trial began, Jamie followed through with his plan to plead guilty, avoiding the death penalty. His decision also spared Ivet's family the anguish of seeing graphic photos or hearing the gruesome details of her murder in court. On March 9th, 2019, 2 years after his conviction, Jamie Osuna, infamously known as the Real Joker, made national headlines once again. This time, he committed one of the most gruesome acts in prison history, brutally murdering his cellmate, Luis Romero. Romero, a 44-year-old inmate, had spent 27 years in prison for his involvement in a gang-related killing as a teenager. Despite his long incarceration, Romero was nearing his release when tragedy struck. The details of the crime were shocking. Jaime mutilated Romero's body in ways that defied comprehension. He gouged out an eye, severed a finger, removed several ribs, and even tore out a piece of his lung. In a horrifying final act, Jaime decapitated Romero and carved the infamous Joker smile across his face by cutting from ear to ear. Disturbingly, Jamie also took photographs of the mutilated body, which were later confiscated by prison officials. When the guards conducted their morning check, they found Jamie calmly wearing a necklace made of rope with a part of Romero's body hanging from it as a pendant. The motive for the crime remained unclear, as there had been no apparent conflict between the two inmates. They had shared a cell for only 2 days before the horrific incident occurred. Jamie's unpredictability and violent tendencies were well documented, making Romero's family understandably outraged. They questioned why someone like Romero, so close to release, was placed in a cell with a known murderer classified as extremely dangerous. This failure in judgment raised significant concerns about the prison's management and protocols. Jamie had long been regarded as one of the most dangerous and volatile inmates. Prison staff were terrified of him, and fellow inmates considered him deranged. His file specifically recommended minimal contact with other inmates and staff, and he had been kept in solitary confinement throughout his imprisonment. The decision to house Romero with Jaime was highly unusual and, in hindsight, disastrously negligent. Following the incident, Jaime was transferred to Stockton Prison, a facility designed for inmates requiring medical or psychiatric care. In March 2021, after a psychological evaluation, Jaime was declared incompetent to stand trial and was deemed unable to be held fully accountable for his actions. He was diagnosed with a schizophrenia spectrum disorder, which further complicated his case. Meanwhile, Jaime's former wife, Jane, had divorced him and was trying to rebuild her life. The destructive relationship with Jaime and the subsequent loss of custody of her children had left her deeply scarred. She underwent multiple courses of psychotherapy to cope with the trauma and rebuild her mental health after her harrowing experiences with him. Jane often wonders why her ex-husband, Jaime Osuna, directed his anger and violence toward Iet Pina, a woman who bore striking similarities to herself. This question haunts her, leaving her with a profound sense of guilt for the children Iet left behind. Jane knows that Jaime's true hostility was directed at her, and that he likely intended to harm her in the same horrific way. For reasons she cannot fully understand, he chose to hurt someone else instead. Now, Jane is focused on rebuilding her life and moving forward. She is determined to distance herself and her son from any association with Jaime, the man known as the real Joker. Tired of media scrutiny and the public fascination with her former husband, Jane longs for a quiet, peaceful existence. She avoids interviews and keeps her life private, focusing solely on providing a stable environment for her child. Jaime, meanwhile, has been spiraling deeper into mental instability. His paranoia has worsened, and he refuses to take the medication prescribed to him or engage with prison psychiatrists. He rarely leaves his cell, isolating himself further from both inmates and staff. This behavior underscores his continued descent into darkness and the dangerous unpredictability that has defined his life. Jane is committed to ensuring her son has no connection to the legacy of violence and infamy Jaime has left behind. She has worked tirelessly to shield him from the public's prying eyes and the shadow of his father's crimes. For Jane, moving forward is not just about survival, it's about breaking the cycle of pain and creating a better future. The story of Jaime Osuna is a chilling reminder of how unchecked trauma, neglect, and violence can shape a person in unimaginable ways. It underscores the importance of addressing mental health issues, fostering empathy, and creating systems that prevent individuals from falling through the cracks. Jaime's life, marked by suffering and chaos, serves as a grim warning of what can happen when the cycle of abuse goes unbroken. Thank you for spending time with this story. If you found it compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means a lot and helps bring more stories like this to light. Stay aware, stay curious, and let's continue exploring the lessons these stories teach us.